Hello there, and welcome to video number 3, in which we're going to be looking at Precambrian life on land. So we're starting a whiz through the history of everything that has lived on land. So let's start by asking us what we know of the earliest life on land. Well, I think it stands to reason. It's obvious that in order for life to evolve on land, we need land surfaces for that life to evolve on. So that actually takes us back to this timeline here that we saw in Milestones in Evolution, and we have to look on this timescale to understand the earliest formation of continental crust. So I can tell you that based on the current literature, as summarized in this paper by Kirkland et al. From 2025, that continental crust started to form by at least 4.2 billion years ago. So that's 4,200 million years ago. But that continental crust, so this is a silica-rich kind of crust, was initially still submerged by oceans. We think it emerged above sea level towards the end of the Archean. Certainly, there are sandstones in the 3.22 billion year old Moody's group in Barberton, South Africa, that were deposited in a range of environments we associate with land surfaces today. These are alluvial, fluvial, and possibly Aeolian paleo environments. That means that they were deposited either in rivers or possibly in deserts. So that's really exciting. And actually, relatively recently, these rocks have been suggested to host the first fossil record of life on land in the form of microbial mats that were associated with river deposits. The rocks themselves are shown in the photograph on the left, with these mats marked by the white arrow here. So this is a photograph that was actually taken on fieldwork in South Africa. And a close-up of these structures is shown on the right, and these dark layers you can see here are remnants of what is thought to be a microbial mat, so a thick mat of microbes on the surface of the Earth some 3.22 billion years ago. The geochemistry of the carbon of these structures also supports the idea that these are remnants of life on land. What exactly those microbes were, what their metabolism was, is a matter of debate. And if you want to see some more, read some more information about this Hohmann reference on the slide is an excellent place to start. It's really interesting and exciting stuff. I can also tell you that as time moves forward, we get more and more appearance of these kinds of rocks. Those were the very earliest ones, but we have a widespread appearance of mature sediments associated with continental land in the early Proterozoic from 2.5 billion years onwards. And until 420 million years ago, most books will say that there is no life on land. But that's not really true. That's a simplification. Really, while there weren't animals or plants, complex eukaryotes on land, we can say that for all of this time period, from the widespread appearance of these continental exposed surfaces, land was probably covered by a thick green ooze, which made up early kind of life on land. These are probably bacteria. An obvious place to look, in fact, is cyanobacteria. So there are some cyanobacteria shown on this slide, some individuals that are joined together here on the left and a colony shown on the right-hand side here. Cyanobacteria are the organisms that are responsible for releasing the oxygen that caused the GOE that we learnt about in Milestones. And I can certainly tell you that by 2.7 billion years ago, there's evidence that these were surviving in exposed intertidal and lacustrine, so lake-based settings. This suggests that cyanobacteria had adapted to the higher UV flux that must have existed before we had lots of oxygen in the atmosphere on the surface of the Earth. So they were capable of surviving in continents. And by inference, it's probable that there were cyanobacteria on land proper by this time too, and that must have happened somewhere around 3 to 2.7 billion years ago. I can tell you further that molecular clock estimates, which we've learnt about in phylogenetics, support an older origin for the group. And those there are suggestions that actually stem cyanobacteria arose somewhere between 3,300 and 3,600 million years ago. So we've got a group of organisms that have a very ancient origin at 3.6 GA that were definitely on land by about 3 GA, by about 3 billion years ago. And I'm telling you, in fact, about the origin because there are lines of evidence to suggest that the origin of this group as a whole, the cyanobacteria, may have itself occurred in fresh water. And if so, these are amongst the earliest land organisms that we are likely to find. It's a very interesting place, an area of research at the moment. And I've put some references on the slide for you here that will tell you more about it if you want to read more. By 1.1 billion years ago, a large single supercontinent had amassed. This is a continent we called Rodinia. It was roughly equatorial. How the bits that are still around today were likely geographically related to each other is shown on this paleo map here. And we actually have widespread evidence for life on land from this time period, which you may not necessarily see in that many books about terrestrialization. Some examples of this include these beautiful fossils from non-marine Scottish sediments. So these are a series of rocks called the Torridonian rocks of northwest Scotland. And a member of this succession, the Store group, has been radiometrically dated at about 1.2 billion years old. This rock, the Store group, provides a number of lines for evidence, a number of lines of evidence for early terrestrial life. In fact, there is a diverse assemblage that's known from these rocks of dispersed palinomorphs. So palinomorphs are very small fossils which are recovered from a rock by dissolving it with a very strong acid. These are the things that are left over. And by doing this to the 1.2 to 1 billion year old Torridon group, people have recovered some really interesting fossils that are shown on this slide here. These fossils include candidates for early eukaryote fossil life on land. There are blue-green algae, and there's lots of evidence that these inhabited periodically exposed mats. There's also evidence in these rocks for lots of cyanobacteria as well, again showing that cyanobacteria were alive on land at this time period. So that's a really interesting and cool rock deposit. Another really interesting one that I should mention is the Nonsuch Shale. So this is a rock that's outcrops in Michigan and Wisconsin in the USA that has been radiometrically dated to about 1 billion years old. And this is an ancient lake deposit. We can tell this from its sedimentology, from the sedimentary rocks that have been deposited. And we can also say that in these freshwater environments, there are stromatolites. These were growing in ponds that occupied abandoned channels on the surface of alluvial fans. So in a river system, you get still water, and this still water was being occupied by stromatolites at this time period. Sorry, I just knocked over my cup there. That was less than ideal. So once more, we know about these fossils because people have recovered microfossils by dissolving the rocks in acid, getting us some of those palinomorphs again. And this gives us direct evidence of what kinds of organism were inhabiting the waters and the shoreline of this Nonsuch lake system. And there are as many as 50 different species. A few of them are shown on this slide here. There are a number of morphologies that are of note in this early land-based assemblage. They're of note because they include a large cell size. Some of them even have a modular construction, and you can see some examples of that here. And they have pseudo-branching, so they seem to branch from each other. So that's really, really interesting in terms of the complexity of form that we get in these fossils. But despite that complexity of form, there is little evidence at this time for complex multicellularity of life on land, so we don't see much in the form of tissue differentiation, say. Overall, the evidence from these lake systems, and such as Nonsuch and the Torridonian, suggest that multicellularity in eukaryotes on land had not proceeded, at least by 1 billion years, beyond that of simple serial filaments, so long filamentous fossils. Okay. So to conclude, unicellular organisms formed a biomass-rich cover of continental surfaces from relatively early on, we think, in Earth history. And it is into those ecosystems that plant-dominated ecosystems eventually evolved much, much later. This is nicely summed up by this diagram, which I took from this paper from 2013, which shows us that all of these lines show different aspects of the fossil record, or what we understand about early Earth. And this shows us that the early fossil record is patchy. You can see that there are lots of gaps in the fossil record and all of these other elements of the Earth life system. But by the Proterozoic, things get much less patchy, and we have actually a very clear picture about the state of life on land from surprisingly early on. Certainly from the Paleoproterozoic onwards, we have a clear picture of what's going on, although you may not necessarily read about that in textbooks about terrestrialization, which tend to focus on more complex eukaryotes. We can say that eukaryotes in simpler forms were definitely on land by 1 billion years ago, as attested to by the Nunsuch shale and the Torridonian pelanomorphs that I just showed you. But I must also report to you that after that time period, there are extremely few non-marine rocks deposited until land plant spores start appearing in the middle Ordovician period. So we've got a long time period where we don't have as many land deposited rocks as we would like. There is, from this big gap, quite a large body of work on paleosols, that's fossilized soils, but a lot of that has proven quite controversial, and exactly what they can tell us about life on land remains a matter of active debate. If you do more reading about this kind of early terrestrialization, especially this run-up to plants appearing, do bear in mind that controversy and critically think about the papers that you're reading. And with that, that's the end of video number 3, and I'll see you in video number 4, where I'm going to talk about how plants moved onto land. It's going to be awesome. See you there in a sec.